Welcome to The Observable Unknown, where science meets the unexplained. I'm Dr. Juan Carlos Ray of crowscupboard.com, and after 2 decades of working at the intersection of comparative religious studies, grief counseling, anthropology, quantum mechanics, and consciousness studies, I've discovered that our most profound human experiences often exist in the space between what we can prove and what we can perceive. In this podcast, we'll explore the measurable influences of immeasurable forces, those hidden factors that shape our reality, but often escape our traditional scientific frameworks. From the latest research in consciousness studies to the ancient wisdom that's now finding validation in neuroscience and quantum physics, we're here to bridge the gap between academic rigor and spiritual insight. Whether you're a skeptic, a seeker, or simply curious about the deeper mechanics of human experience, you're in the right place. Together, we'll examine the evidence, challenge our assumptions, and explore what happens when we dare to look beyond the obvious. There are some people whose work announces itself loudly, and others whose presence is felt before a single claim is made. My guest today belongs to the latter company. Dallisa describes herself as a fifth-generation intuitive, a phrase that can sound exotic or ornamental in careless hands. In hers, it is neither. She speaks of inheritance not as performance, but as responsibility, a discipline carried forward, shaped by listening, restraint, and long memory. What has been passed down is not spectacle, but attention. Her work moves between the personal and the perennial, between what is felt and what can be said without distortion. She approaches intuition less as revelation than as literacy, a way of reading subtle patterns, human currents, and interior weather with patience rather than urgency. There is something quietly radical in this stance. In an age hungry for certainty and declarations, Dallisa practices discernment. She understands that insight matures slowly, that meaning deepens when it is not forced, and that wisdom often arrives wearing ordinary clothes. This is a conversation about inheritance, perception, and the ethics of knowing, about what it means to listen across generations, about how one learns to trust what is subtle without surrendering rigor. So, without any further ado, let's join the conversation. Dallisa, it is fantastic to have you sitting with me today, and I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to introduce yourself to our listeners. I want to start right off with a very specific question that cuts to the core of your identity. You come from 5 generations of psychic sensitives. When did inheritance stop feeling like family lore and begin to feel like destiny knocking rather loudly at your personal door?
Such a great question. I'm delighted to be here with you today. I noticed my gifts actually all dropping in overnight in 2015. And it might sound kind of silly to say this, but I didn't know that it was going to happen because I am a fifth generation psychic medium. And you would think that a psychic would know what's going to happen in their own life. But that wasn't the case. I actually was a dating coach and a matchmaker in 2015 when all of this happened. And the very kind of quick version of the story is when I was living in Texas, I decided last minute to go on a trip to New York to go to the Omega Institute to go to a workshop on, of all topics, synchronicity and how everything happens for a reason. I mean, I couldn't write this any better. And I go up there and attend this incredible workshop that was led by Dr. Eben Alexander, who's a neurosurgeon who had a near death experience and wrote a book about it. And the whole weekend was filled with many synchronicities, but the last one was probably the most interesting one, at least for me on a personal level. I went to a friend's house who just so happened to have a home near the Omega Institute, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I'd never been there before. And he said, "Come on by after your retreat. I'd love to see you and catch up." So I go over there, I pull up into the driveway, and I hear Peter, my friend, yell, "There's a frog! There's a frog!" And I thought, wait, what? Because I'm unloading my suitcase out of the car. And there was a giant frog on the doorstep, which to most people wouldn't mean a whole lot. But Peter was the one that had created my logo for my dating and matchmaking company that I owned at the time. And it was a big giant frog. And we laughed about it. And I go inside and, we catch up, we have dinner. And then unfortunately, Peter gets a phone call that his beloved aunt had died unexpectedly that day after falling down a flight of stairs. So, of course, I give him my condolences. I don't know his family. I've never met anyone in his family. And I go off to the guest bedroom and I go to sleep. And that is when Peter's aunt, Barbara, who I'd never met, didn't know anything about, came to me in my dream state, like the astral state. And I could see what she looked like, clear as day. And she wasn't moving her mouth, but I could hear her telepathically. And she asked if I would tell her nephew that she was okay and that she made it to the other side. So it gives me chills even recounting this. And I woke up the next morning and remembered right away what had happened. And I walked out to the kitchen where Peter was and I told him. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, what did she look like?" And I described her hair, her facial features. And he said, "That's her." And we were both kind of shocked
Hmm.
at what had happened. And I went home back to Texas that same day and was having lunch with a friend a couple of days later, telling her this incredible story and reached for my phone to show her pictures from my trip.
Hmm.
And I actually ended up catching a glimpse of a photo that had been text messaged over to me. And I dropped my phone in the restaurant and started tearing up. And it was because my friend Peter had just sent me a text message of a photo of his Aunt Barbara that was on display at her service that day.
Mm.
And it was exactly as I saw her in my dream just a couple of nights before. So that is the catalyst that started everything. And that is really where I became aware of my own ability to pull in information. And it wasn't then at that point just, stories that I had had with my own grandmother or my dad, or stories that my grandmother recalled with her grandmother. Because my grandmother, for example, when I was growing up and we'd sit in her living room and talk about her premonitions, she could also see full body apparitions with her physical eyes walking through her house. And she could tell you what they look like and what clothes they had on. And I was like half intrigued and half terrified, to be honest, but I kept asking questions over the years. So I was very open to all of it. But I didn't think that I had the ability until that fateful night in New York.
What kinds of factors made you believe you had been excluded from your family lineage? Did you have a sibling who seemed much more intuitive? Did you have maybe a parent who said, well, it's not going to fall on our line because that's not how it works? What made you believe you weren't going to be a recipient of these gifts?
I thought it would have come in earlier. I thought it was something that you were born with and you knew about it since you were a very young child. And that was that. I've met so many people over the years that have said, "Oh, yeah, I've known that I had this gift. And as a child, I would experience, this and that." And I didn't really have those experiences for myself. Now, in hindsight, discussing these things with my grandmother and having some hesitation about her telling me the stories because I would get scared.
Mm.
I think some of that could have blocked my earlier abilities from coming in. But I also think that lifetimes have a divine blueprint of sorts, what we decide before we're born that we're going to experience or go through. And looking back at my life before the year of 2015, there were a lot of things I did and a lot of things I accomplished. And a lot of those have to do with business.
Mm.
And looking now at that, I'm so grateful that I had those experiences and started different companies because it gave me a lot of groundedness and it gave me a lot of the more analytical piece. And so then when, the night happened in 2015 that started me on this journey, I felt like I had more of a balance of right brain, left brain, feeling more like I can be in my own body and have these gifts at the same time. Because a lot of people I've met that have these abilities, their energy will rise so high. It's almost like they rise up and out of their body. And my approach has been that I can connect up, but I'm also very grounded. And I think that combination has not only been helpful in making predictions or doing mediumship over the years, but it's also helped me to explain to students, about business because, I think the universe sends you people that you can help and assist. And I get a lot of individuals from all over that want to have a healing or service based business. They have no idea how to do it, but they're really talented with their gift, but they don't know how to actually make it a career. And so, because I have the blend of the two, I get to do that. And so it makes it fun for me that I'm not having to go all the time into that higher frequency of predictions and connecting with the other side, but I get to have fun and play in the business world, which is what I really love to do.
Because of that piece, because you enjoy business and analytical thought, have you had moments where disbelief became more exhausting than belief in your talents, your abilities, and your family lineage?
Disbelief. I can't think of anything off the top of my head where I had like a roadblock or a challenge that made me rethink what I'm doing or how I'm doing it. But the as I'm saying that out loud, the thing that does come to mind is this profession is can be very, very exhausting. And I was naive to that, I I thought that this would just be like a normal occupation where you connect and you share wisdom and guidance and hopefully leave better people better than how you found them. But what I didn't realize was that when you are the conduit, when you are the channeler, like I am, you are running frequency through your whole body. And that has led me to pause a few times to consider what is it that I'm doing? Like, is this what I want to do? Is this worth my exhaustion? And what I've concluded over the years is that I love talking about it, on podcasts or in classes and reaching more and more people as groups. But my one-on-one time gets more limited as the years go by
Mm.
because of my boundary around energy work and preserving my own energy and how I feel. Because when I show up, and whether it's for a class or for some kind of retreat, I want to make sure that I am firing on all cylinders. So that was a misconception that I had that really had to be considered over the years.
Mm. So, how did being born into this lineage shape your perception differently than a teacher or a certification could?
Seeing it firsthand with my dad and with my grandmother and having these one-on-one conversations with them that I trust both of them. I believe their gifts. They've talked to me about different things over the years. My grandmother has since passed, but she would make predictions that would happen. And so you gain a lot of trust when even more so than you naturally have for your loved ones. But she would make the prediction and then it would happen. And then you're like, wow, this is real. And so when it happened to me, because I had that background and that trust, just felt it deep within the cells of my body. I knew that what they were experiencing was real. And so I felt like I could lean into it more and experience it for myself and whatever way that looked like. Because mine really started off with doing written channelings where I would take the name of a person and put it on the top of a piece of paper and write down information that I was getting from them, their energy, what I would see, hear, feel. And I would note everything down. And then I would get on the phone with them and tell them what I channeled and to amazing results, which is what kept it burning and growing because those I would consider like the introductory beta test. I was trying to uh, basically copy what energy I was in New York to see if I could replicate the energy coming through again. And I was able to do that. And I did it through using binaural beats and listening to high frequency sounds. And I would put headphones on and with my pen and paper and the first name of the person, I would just start writing everything down that came in. But because those were so successful in the beginning, then I started doing phone sessions. And phone sessions for me in hindsight are interesting because I couldn't see them, right? They're over the phone.
Right.
I couldn't read body language. I couldn't read facial expressions. I couldn't see anything about them. But I was able to accurately bring forward information. And so then those were accurate. So then it's like, wow, what am I going to do now? Because the time I hadn't quit my job, I was working at a business school. I hadn't dissolved my matchmaking and dating company. So I remember sitting there in my living room going, okay, you know, I have family members that could do this. I'm doing this. I think it's time I consider doing this as my full time profession. And so, with that, I actually moved back to Las Vegas, where I had been living previously, because I thought if there's a city that's going to welcome a psychic and want to listen to a psychic, Las Vegas is very open minded. And I'm going to go there. And my parents are there in case I fail miserably. I'll have a roof over my head. I know they'll feed me. And so I went to Las Vegas and then it just started really snowballing. I had built up such a clientele that I ended up starting my own spiritual center in Las Vegas. And one of the predictions my grandmother had made years and years before actually came true. I remember sitting in her living room one time when I was young, and she used to call me Lisi. And she said, Lisi, you are going to need a stage name one day. And I remember talking to her and thinking, what in the world? Because, I was doing ballet and tap, classes as a kid, dance classes. I was, doing some theater classes and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll be like this famous like actress or dancer or something. Like, how fun. She goes, yeah, yeah, let's practice you writing your stage name. She goes, I really like the stage name Delisa Del Rey. And so I remember practicing Delisa Del Rey. And then all these years later, when I'm in Las Vegas, a haunted hotel in Las Vegas, had asked if I at first, wanted to start doing some content and working with some media through like news reporters that would come through the hotel. And could I walk them through there and talk about the haunted space? And then one day there was an invitation to have my own psychic stage show at the haunted hotel. And I ended up making the stage somewhat of a replica of my grandmother's living room,
Hmm.
complete with a chair that looked like the one that she would sit in and tell me her predictions and talk to me about the spirits and I made it feel very homey with photos of her and my distant relatives, black and white photos on the stage. And yeah, so I am absolutely a believer in all of this. And I think everyone can do it. And I don't think there's one path that everyone needs to take in order for it to work or to be fulfilled or to help people in this way. And so I think it's more about listening to ourselves and our gifts and how it's unfolding for us and following some of those breadcrumbs that are laid out for you and trusting that you can bring forward the information. You don't have to be born with the gift.
Now, that's an interesting piece for you to focus on personal agency more so than a lot of individuals who rely on the concept of lineage. In that discussion of lineage, did your father or your grandmother or any of your other relatives have the idea there were specific tie-ins to ethnicity, culture, geography that somehow lent attribution to the talents that they were exhibiting from whatever age it manifested in them in?
We haven't found a direct correlation to who may have these gifts, outside of looking at our own family. I've noticed just in things I've heard over the years that there are different countries or cultures that do practice more of these gifts. They're more open to these gifts. And I would say even more so than the United States. And I even talk a lot about reincarnation and planning out lifetimes when we're on the other side, which is kind of where we came from and where we're going back to. But a lot of people refer to it as the other side. And yeah, there's a lot of depth in past lives, and America doesn't really talk about it. But there are many countries that believe in it and do. It's part of their, maybe daily life that they consider lifetimes they've had and other lifetimes that they may end up going into. Um, but I have also, going back to my own family, we've had conversations about how the psychic lineage can be correlated to families or individuals that exhibit these gifts having connections to, um, you could say, craft, UAP, UFOs. I think it's an energy thing. What I mean by that is because people that are psychics are believed to have perhaps more of a connection to communicate or to see or experience galactic beings or crafts. I think it's because those crafts and those UFOs are like at a higher frequency. This is going down a whole other rabbit hole, but I think as a psychic or a medium, we have to raise our frequency high enough in order to access, we could call it kind of source energy, God energy, all that is. I think it's a frequency match. So if I'm trying to make a prediction about something, I need to ensure that my own energy that I embody is high enough for me to then receive those downloads. You can kind of think of it as like raising it high enough to go into the energy. Mediumship is even in a higher frequency than that to be able to connect with loved ones or animals on the other side. That's a higher frequency. But I think UAPs um, are embodying a higher frequency. And so I think psychics, mediums, because they naturally are going into higher frequencies for their own practice and their own work, they're going to be able to see UAPs much easier because of the vibration, the frequency that they are embodying, because they are matching a frequency of what the craft is at. And therefore, they'll be able to see it where other people, maybe even looking at the same sky, would not be able to see it. So it brings in all kinds of things to think about in terms of, what's happening in the world, what's happening up in the sky, what's happening in our solar system. I think for the normal kind of day to day person walking around, they are only seeing a small fraction of what is actually happening. But those that are at that higher frequency are able to see and experience a lot more of these higher frequencies.
Hmm. So when you consider frequently discussing what you were referring to as the craft, that implies there's a practice involved. Is there any religious element that your family in previous generations or current generations associated with this talent set?
A lot of my family members are Catholic or were Catholic when they were here. But I have not seen a correlation between religion and accessing psychic abilities. I think they are different. They can overlap. There can be somebody that is religious that is also psychic. I would say the religion that they are a part of or believe in can get a little bit tricky if the religion doesn't believe in these abilities.
Hmm.
There are some religions that think you shouldn't be accessing psychic information. They think that you should, for example, go to the priest and talk to the priest about everything, and then the priest will give it to God. And it's not a knock. I grew up Catholic, right? But now I'm doing this work for so many years. Like, wait a second. You can just go directly to God. Like you can build this relationship with universal energy. Some people like to call it God. Some people just like to say source. And
Mhm.
I'm not huge on labels. So whatever somebody wants to refer to it as is I think is completely fine. They're all, I think, a bit interchangeable. But going into the source energy is something that you can grow and build within yourself. And I'm often asked, well, I want to have maybe it's more intuition at first. Like I want to, strengthen my intuitive muscle. Then I would suggest doing a few things that will help to start to raise your vibration up because intuition is also tied to the frequency. So things like taking a walk in nature, maybe without your phone, maybe without any music, and just taking a walk.
Mhm.
Meditating, doing guided meditations, or trying to find something that's like a binaural beats audio file and start listening to that maybe once a week and see how your intuition starts building and growing. But in my opinion, the access to the information is correlated to how you personally are increasing your vibration. And so anybody can kind of think about that through their own life, their own daily practices. What is it that they're eating? What are they drinking? Are they in a stressful environment? Because anyone that kind of thinks about their own life and their choices they're making right now, they can probably, if they had a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the highest frequency, and you know, uh, one being the lowest, most people could kind of think about their life and their choices and come up with a number that they're sitting at.
Mhm.
And then you could ask yourself, well, how could I get this number to be higher? Do I need to eat healthier? Do I need to drink more water? Do I need to lower my stress? Do I need to sleep better at night? So it's kind of all the things we're taught to do to just be healthy in general actually correlate to the frequency. So I think most people can kind of do an audit of their own life and see where they could make some better or different choices of what they want to do and try to start strengthening that muscle.
Mhm. So, when, for instance, a large scale event approaches, how does it first announce itself in you before it becomes language or prediction?
In terms of like a world event that's about to happen.
Or maybe just something very personal, a large scale event that might be seismic in nature, something that changes perhaps your living circumstances, the living circumstances of a loved one. maybe something tied to finance, something that's just very significant, very important, something that intuitively has made itself known to you. Obviously, it's occurring at some level before you can translate that into language or an actual prediction. How does it manifest first?
In a couple of different ways. An example is in a dream that I had just over a year ago. I was dreaming that there was a helicopter and an airplane that were in a crash. And I woke up out of the dream and I felt, heard this download of make a video about it. Because I was making a lot of 60-second reels on Instagram and Facebook. I still do, but this one just stands out. So I had no makeup on. I was still in my pajamas and I talked about this crash that I saw. And it was jarring, and people were watching it and commenting on it. Then a couple of days later, the airplane helicopter crash happened in the Washington, D.C. area and tragically killed many, many people.
Hmm.
And that one sticks with me because I saw the energy of it happening before it happened and makes me feel like things like that happen. And why I was nudged to talk about it out loud was to remind all of us of this intuitive muscle that we have inside of ourselves that we can develop. Not that everybody should or could be out there, making world predictions, but just for our own life, for our own even survival or thriving. I think this is something that's really important and will become increasingly more important. There are also a couple of examples where I was alerted of crimes before they happened. And each of those, they have some similarities to them, but I'll go through them quickly. I was in need of a cashier's check on a Friday afternoon and decided I needed to get over to the bank so that I could get it done. And I pulled up in front of the bank and I felt this strange premonition of a robbery. And I could sense it with my psychic eye, like this figure walking by in front of my car, but he didn't look like he was physically there. I was just seeing like this energy imprint of him and walked right in front of my car and right in front of the ATM I was parked in front of. And I thought, well, I think I'm just going to go inside. So I go inside, I hurry up, I get the cashier's check, I get back to my car. And I thought, oh God, thank God that I wasn't involved in some kind of, robbery at this bank. And I drive off. And a little while later, my parents call me, text me, excuse me, and they said, whatever you do, don't go to the bank by your house. There was just a robbery. And it turns out that the figure that I saw of this man, he watched a woman use the ATM, followed her, held her and her baby at gunpoint.
Hmm.
And so I was seeing this energy. It felt like I was almost in a twilight zone, that I
Hmm.
wasn't viewing it in real time, but I was seeing it in this like different world. It was very odd. The other two, it was Halloween. And my mom asked me if I would go grocery shopping with her. And I never would go grocery shopping with her. This was like a very rare thing. And I thought, you know what? Fine, I'll go. So we go to the grocery store. We're walking through it. And the first few minutes, I'm okay. And then I start feeling pressure in my chest, like this, like heaviness. And, she's picking up her items and we're going towards the back of the store. And I start feeling, hearing, sensing people running out of the back of the store. So I was getting this premonition of people leaving out the exit door in the back. And I started kind of fidgeting because my mom looked over at me and said, "Are you okay?" And I finally said, "Okay, listen, I think that there's going to be something that happens." I explained what I had seen. And she said, "Oh my God, we got to get out of here." She goes, "I got one more thing I need to get." So we go to the aisle where she's got to buy my dad's lemonade. And she's picking up the glasses of lemonade. And I'm standing in the aisle and I can psychically hear two men fighting. And I turned to her because she knows at this point. I said, "Do you hear these men fighting?" Just to double check. And she said, "No, I don't hear anything." I said, "Okay, we got to hurry up." So we get to the checkout line. We got the receipt out the door, get to the car. We're like, thank God, this kind of feeling again. Whatever is happening, we didn't get into the middle of this. So the next day, my mom was getting her hair done, and the hairdresser says to her, "Oh, did you hear about what happened at that store?" And my mom said, "No, what happened?" And the person explains it and says, there were two men. And this is a store, I'll say this at the beginning. This was a store that was down the street from the store that I was in when I was getting the premonition. So I wasn't even in the physical store, but I was in one right down the street. But I
Mhm.
was still picking up on this because the energy was so strong. So there were two men. They sounds like it had started through a road rage incident. The guys get out of their car. One of them has a gun. They go into the front of the store with the one has the gun, and people start running and they run out of the back of the store. And we had the timestamp on the receipt for when I was getting the premonition, and I was getting it right as it was happening. So, and then the third one quickly, I was at an Airbnb and I was reading a book in bed, and I heard psychically, "Where's your stun gun?" And that is not the message you want to get, before you're getting ready to go to bed.
In
And
an
so
Airbnb.
yeah. And so I like with my eyes, I find like where the stun gun is. So I'm like, it's right there. And then I heard, because you're going to have a break-in. So I don't know how I'm a good sleeper, but I don't know how I fell asleep, but I did. It's like, okay, whatever. I fell asleep. And a few hours later, wouldn't you know, a man burst in through the front door and I jumped out of the bed screaming, and thank God he went away and left. Um but because I'd had that warning, I felt like I was more prepared to like get up and be ready, and ultimately, the person leaving, and I'm sure I probably have that like stored in my cell memory now, and that'll be something that I'll remember for years to come. But yeah, so the premonitions can come sometimes through dreams, sometimes just a feeling that starts coming in, and then that feeling gets stronger and stronger. Sometimes I'll hear like the words and phrases that pass over my right ear, that are like, "You're gonna have a break-in tonight." And sometimes it'll just look like a daydream kind of playing out in front of me, like seeing that sort of like silhouette of the man in front of the ATM machine. So it varies. I'm blessed to have the ability to tap into all of the major psychic abilities. And so for me, I think spirit just uses whatever they feel will get the message across. And that can vary, depending on how much they need me to be relaxed and open. And I think with the example of the airplane helicopter crash, I was asleep, and so they really could like get me to focus in on what they were showing me and feel it deeply, because that didn't have anything really to do with the day to day that I was kind of, doing. So bringing it to me in a dream made it stand out more.
Hmm. So all of these examples are passive. You're receiving the information, and it certainly comes into play, obviously, in the lives of others and in your own life. When you are actively engaging your intuition, what does that body signal feel like? What does it show you? Whether that's interoceptively or perhaps through a sense of fragrance, a sense of sound. When you're actively engaging your intuition, how does it try to signal you physically?
I will feel a sensation go through my body. Some people will get like chills on their arms or their legs. I hear that a lot. I definitely have that as a sensation that will go through my legs when I'm bringing in some kind of intuitive message. So I will watch for hair raising, the goosebumps that you have. Um, Honestly, I think I feel like I need to say this because some people may be listening and saying like, "Oh, Delisa's so lucky. She can see everything about her life." And that's not true. I think
Mm,
that's a misconception because it's hard to see the picture when we are the frame. And can I sit down and ask a question about myself or my life and get an answer? Absolutely. Yes. But it's much easier for me to look at someone else's life or to look at country or a political figure and look at what I get psychically around that and how that comes in. And again, kind of the chills going through the body is a marker for me that what I'm getting is important or that we need to make sure that we listen to this or we're digging deeper to this. But for my own self, I'd say yes, the chills. But also, if I'm going to sit down with a pen and paper and write on the top, spirit, I call them spirit team of like angels, guides, ancestors, loved ones, spirit team. What do I need to know today? And I will just begin to, with my all of my senses, just begin to bring in whatever it is that needs to come in to answer that question. And without any judgment and without skipping a beat, I will write down everything I'm getting. Any kind of sensation in the stomach, because some people will feel their intuition in their stomach, or if they have chills coming up their arms, write it all down. And what you will find is if you start doing this on a regular basis, even if it's once a week, spirit team, what do I need to know today? And you just get used to tuning into the subtleties and writing it down. You will find that that muscle gets stronger and stronger, and you'll be able to pull forward much more information for yourself. But don't be discouraged if while you're doing this work, if you're starting to feel like you're getting more information for other people, even when you're not asking, but you're starting to get more and more insight into people that you know, or maybe you walk past somebody in the grocery store and you start getting this feeling about them. That's very common because when you are developing your own gifts and abilities, it's going to develop all of the gifts and abilities in terms of who you can receive that information on or for as long as they are willing and open. So if you do get a message, let's say, while you're walking through the grocery store for someone, I would suggest not sharing that message with them because I feel it's really important to psychic hygiene that people give permission to receive that information, especially if it's about them, their life, or a loved one. There are a lot of people out there that aren't open to it or they don't want to hear it. And you giving them a piece of unsolicited psychic information can do a lot of damage. Uh, uh, so it's just something I would kind of stay away from. But the price of being sensitive is being sensitive. And so as you work on it for yourself, you'll notice more likely than not that you'll start to pick up on other things that don't have to do directly with you.
mm. So you're referring to a sensation of, you had mentioned your description of frisson, or you were calling it hair standing on end or goosebumps. Has that bodily signal ever misled you? or is it just always accurate?
I haven't found a time where it was misleading or didn't give me the right indication. I've learned that it's part of my own psychic dictionary. So, psychic dictionary is where you notice what your own signs and signals are that you are receiving and what they mean. So, chills for me is an indication that I'm on the right track. Like, whatever I'm talking about, either talk about it more or dig in deeper, right? Um, but when I'm looking at something psychically in my mind's eye with my third eye, it's like playing a game of Pictionary with spirit. They could be showing you something very literal or something that symbolizes something else. So, for example, for a long time, whenever I saw in my mind's eye a pair of dice that were being like shooken up and rolled, I knew that that was a symbol that I was receiving, that it was about a risk, like a risk that was being questioned. And if it was tuning into myself, it's like, okay, well, what's the risk that I'm considering right now? Okay, well, what area of life is that? So it's kind of a curiosity where you can lean in and dig deeper around that symbol. But everybody's psychic dictionary is different. And so practicing this, whatever the symbol is that you are getting, is going to be something tied to your own life and your own life experiences. And so
Mm.
for taking a risk, you might not even have dice that show up. You might get a very different symbol if you're practicing clairvoyance and see a very different symbol or a different image or a different like mini movie that's playing out in your mind's eye. But typically spirit will use the same symbols or the same words or um the same feelings or physical sensations each time because they know that you understand that what they're trying to bring through. So they typically will just help you develop your psychic dictionary. So if let's say one day you're practicing for yourself and spirit team, what do I need to know today? And all of a sudden you start like in your mind's eye like a daydream, you start seeing a baby. And you're like, "Oh boy." you know. And so you write down like I am seeing a baby and you're just starting out, you can, and you can, I'd still do this to this day if it's needed, but it's a two-way communication. So in that moment, when you receive that message of seeing a baby, you can ask spirit, God, universe, I don't know what this baby means. Show it to me a different way. And so then maybe as an example, the next layer that you see, the next thing that you see is somebody doing a handshake. Okay, then you write down, I'm seeing a handshake. Okay, I see a baby. I see a handshake. Okay, spirit, I see these two things. And if I get real quiet with myself, it feels like this could be around something new. And spirit, is this something new around me reaching some kind of like agreement? Oh, I've been applying for a job. Could this be that I'm like accepting a job, a new like handshake, a new beginning? Could this be it? And then you can ask spirit, show me yes or no. And for me, my yes, there's a couple different symbols I have for yes, but one of them is I can see and hear a bell ringing, and that is yes. And you can just keep doing that exercise to build the dictionary because chances are they're going to use that baby again and likely for some kind of new beginning. Um, and then they'll probably use that handshake again whenever there's some kind of business deal or some kind of job opportunity. Um, and so you can layer in these different symbols when you're trying to figure out what they mean.
Mm. So a lot of your intuition is obviously coming to you through an internal dialogue. Are there moments when that dialogue is perhaps silent and you have to rely on a tool external to yourself, a method of sortilege or some specific practice that allows you to engage external tools or elements that you would use to supplement your intuition?
I like incorporating in things like oracle cards or tarot cards on occasion. Ironically, for me, I think my channeling is much faster. So I tend to channel just because I just want to know and be done. But if I really have to like sit and dig into it and I have maybe more time that I can spend on it, then I love seeing what the cards will say because the cards will just add in another piece of information.
Mm.
Um, but what I'll say is any tool that you're using, some people use a pendulum. I've even had questions of people using, Ouija boards. The tool is going to take on your energy. And so if you've been really practicing getting your frequency really high, then the tool that you're working with will also be working as a high frequency tool. However, I think they're using the Ouija board as an example. I think that people sitting around that don't know what they're doing with energy, maybe they're sitting around drinking alcohol, which is like bringing the energy down. And they're like, yeah, let's play with the Ouija board. I just based on my experience over the years, I do think it opens a portal and it can bring through entities that are not of a high frequency. And it may even be in a house that somebody's living in right now. And they're like, I feel like there's these beings in my house, but I don't know why. If you were not the original owner, there could have even been somebody in the past that had a Ouija board that were, calling in different energies with it. And your house may have a portal inside of it now where there are energies going in and out of it. So just be mindful. And you can close those portals. I should finish that statement because there might be somebody listening going, "Oh my God, I have a portal." Um, Archangel Michael is who I work with to close any portals. And so if you feel called to use sage or Palo Santo, you can safely light it and, go around your home or your space with it and invite Archangel Michael to come in and ask him to remove any energy that is not yours or not of the highest frequency, dimension, and light. And ask Archangel Michael to close the portals in your house. And that should do it. I would be firm when you're doing it, meaning like take it seriously and um, really put, energy and focus behind it because I do think that, will ensure that the energy is taken care of and the portals are closed. But if you're kind of just going through half, you're like watching a soap opera, you're sipping on your margarita and you're like, have your sage going through. Um, no offense to soap operas and margaritas, but if you're like half paying attention, it's probably not going to have that much of an effect. I would say just wait till you can like really focus and do it and take the several minutes to go through your house and to say the things and to close the portals. Just have your focus on that because you wouldn't want to kind of be half in, half out, and then wonder why the spirits are still there or the ghost is still in your house. And some ghosts are fine and they don't cause any trouble. And some people are like, I don't care if they're there. And so it's really a personal preference. But yeah, there's a lot of facets to being a psychic medium.
Mm. Tell me how your practice and your experience differs from that of your father's or that of your grandmother's.
They approach theirs really as, what is the download that I'm getting or what am I sensing? My dad is much more, he'll get like the intuitive hits and downloads before they happen. My grandmother, when she would sit in her chair, it would just like pop in. And that's claircognizance. That's when the information just drops in through your crown chakra at the top of your head. And that's how hers would happen. They would just drop in and she'd say, "Okay, I just got an ESP, extrasensory perception. Okay, let's talk about it. Um, but then with her physical eyes seeing the full body apparitions, she wouldn't sit there and like call them in. She would literally be watching a program, usually something on country music, and, and in would walk a spirit, usually like in front of her TV where she would see it, and or like over in her kitchen area, but she didn't call it in. I feel like I'm probably, I mean, I never got the chance to meet my great great grandmother, obviously, but I feel like I'm the only one that has been like, I want to call it in. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to get information. But I also think that was probably part of the setup for these incarnations, meaning I do believe that we have different gifts and abilities and purpose that we bring into these lifetimes. And I believe that my great great grandmother, and however far back it went, even before that, and my lineage, that we sat down and we're like, okay, who's going to get to be the person getting downloads and seeing full body apparitions, between this year and this year. And it was probably my grandmother that's like, yeah, I'll do that. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll take the one where like the world is collapsing. Okay, yeah, I'll do that one. So I think we kind of planned out who was going to take what, um, just based on probably what our soul wanted to learn in the incarnation, and perhaps what we had practiced in other lifetimes or developed. And yeah, it's quite amazing when you start unpacking it.
Mm. So, if, let's say, your father and your grandmother were both Catholic, did they incorporate this concept of reincarnation into their worldview? Did they incorporate the concept of chakras into their worldview? Did they incorporate the concept of some of these loaned ideas outside of their standard cultural milieu into what they were trying to do to explain their experience of the numinous, of the unknown?
No, they really didn't. And I don't know if I ever asked my grandmother what she thought about past lives. I'd have to sit and meditate on that and see if there is something that came up around a conversation I had with her. Um, talked about it a little bit with my dad, and my gauge on it is that he's kind of in the middle of, on the fence of like not really saying that he believes it or has had experiences, but also maybe doesn't disbelieve it. So he's kind of in the middle ground with that. Um, and they haven't, or she didn't, and he hasn't brought in a lot of the things that I do and talk about as a professional psychic medium. For example, I remember years ago, I was at my parents' house and I said out loud, "Oh yeah, I just heard da da da." It felt like it just came over my right ear. And I explained it just like that. My dad goes, "Oh yeah, mine's my right ear too." So I think I've been kind of a way shower. And not only for that side of the family, but for my other side of the family as well, where by being who I am and by doing this work and teaching people how to do this work, I have ways of explaining it that I think a lot of people will go, "Oh, yeah, that happens to me," but they didn't know why or how it was happening or how to articulate it or explain it to someone else. But I think I've found more of the words to explain it
Hmm.
so that more and more people, hopefully even outside of my own family and my own community, that they feel even more at home within themselves and with their own gifts because they have a better way of understanding it now.
By expanding the vocabulary. That's
Mhm.
fantastic. What an excellent chat. Thank you so much for sitting with me today, Dallisa. I've enjoyed it immensely, and hopefully I'll have the chance to chat with you again in the near future. If you were sending anyone to your website for any of your courses or anything of that variety, where would you point them?
Yes, thank you. My website is spiritandspark.com, all spelled out, spiritandspark.com. And it's got my classes on there and my social media accounts where I do have those reels, especially the one last January I mentioned in this episode. So I'd love to hear from your audience. So please don't hesitate to reach out and say hello. And thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too.
As we come to the end of this conversation, what lingers is not a set of conclusions, but a quality of attention. In listening to Dallisa, one is reminded that inheritance is not merely a matter of blood or chronology, it is a practice, a way of standing in relation to what came before, and to what asks to be carried forward with care. Her articulation of intuition never strains toward certainty, it remains accountable to listening, to humility, and to the slow work of discernment. There is rigor here, though it wears no uniform. There is lineage here, though it refuses to harden into doctrine. What this conversation offers is permission to take the subtle seriously without abandoning discipline, permission to trust continuity without surrendering discernment, permission to speak of what is felt without turning it into spectacle. I'm grateful for the clarity, the composure, and the generosity of thought Dallisa Hocking brought into this space. Thank you for listening, and until next time, this has been The Observable Unknown.